You know, the first half of the 20th century was just a time of breathtaking change. I mean, humanity made these leaps in technology and society that would have been totally unimaginable just a generation before. But, and this is the big but, this incredible story of progress was shadowed by an equally powerful story of regress. We're talking about a moral and spiritual unraveling that really shook Britain to its core. So in this explainer, we're going to dive right into that central paradox.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. On one hand, you've got the internal combustion engine, the welfare state, amazing progress, right? But on the other hand, the very same minds, the same scientific revolution that gave us all that, also created the tools for mass slaughter and the constant threat of total annihilation. It was a century literally pulling itself in two completely opposite directions at the exact same time.
So we're going to trace the story of this great unraveling. We'll explore how the firm, solid certainties of the 19th century just crumbled away, giving way to all the anxieties and questions that would come to define the 20th.
So how did this all kick off? Well, you have to picture it. The Victorians believed they were living in a world that was built to last forever. I mean, rock solid. But as the new century dawned, that solid ground, it really began to shake.
And you really have to understand just how final these ideas seemed to them. The Victorians saw their whole society as this house built on four unshakable pillars: the home, the Constitution, the empire, and the Christian religion. These weren't just traditions. They were seen as final revelations, like this is it, the permanent state of how things are.
And wow, this quote just nails the shockwave that hit society. For so many people, the collapse of these pillars wasn't freeing, it was absolutely terrifying. The rock they'd been standing on their whole lives was just gone, and it left this huge spiritual vacuum for the masses.
So, what rushed in to fill that vacuum? Well, it was this new spirit of inquiry. Thinkers like George Bernard Shaw started arguing that every single dogma, every authority, whether it was religious or scientific, had to be personally examined and tested. You couldn't just take anything on faith anymore. And here is the powerful critique right at the heart of it all. The 20th century was more than happy to scrap old technology, right? But it clung desperately to old ways of thinking. This call to modernize everything, morals, religion, politics, well, it was totally invigorating for a new generation, but deeply, deeply unsettling for those who felt like their entire world was collapsing.
Now, this whole social upheaval was mirrored almost perfectly in the world of literature, which basically fractured over one fundamental question: what is art even for?
So, two main camps emerged. On one side, you had the Fabian writers, people like Shaw and H.G. Wells. They believed in art for life's sake. For them, literature was a tool for social and political change. But on the other side, you had the Bloomsbury Group, with figures like Virginia Woolf. They championed art for art's sake. Art as this high-minded intellectual pursuit, really, for a select, superior audience.
And at the end of the day, the Bloomsbury vision pretty much won out. The year 1922, as you can see here, was a real watershed moment, when James Joyce's Ulysses and T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land came out. Both of them are monumental, but, let's be honest, very difficult works. Serious literature really began to retreat from the common reader. It became this specialized, almost academic field.
And, this shift from the accessible to the specialized, from the common to the elite, that wasn't just happening in literature. It was playing out across society at large. The dawn of the 20th century came with this huge, grand promise. I mean, after centuries of rule by the few, this was supposed to be it, the moment the ordinary individual, the common man, finally got to take center stage.
But here's the twist. That dream, it soured. Instead of empowering the individual, the century gave rise to mass man, where your individuality was often just lost in the machinery of mass production, mass media, and the massive modern state.
And the real irony is that the very systems that were designed to help the masses often ended up stifling them. The welfare state started treating people like numbers on a punch card. The assembly line just killed craftsmanship and pride in your work. And with the empire gone, all these avenues for individual enterprise and adventure just closed up, leaving this sense of national frustration.
So what happens with all that frustration? Well, it boiled over into a new culture of rebellion, a really deep-seated contempt for authority, for tradition, and for the generations that came before.
And the beatniks were the ultimate symbol of this. They wanted to contract out of a society they just despised. But the great irony, of course, was that to survive as rebels, as tramps, they still depended on the very society they were rejecting.
And this contempt just bled into the culture. Satire, which can be this incredibly powerful tool for social critique in the hands of a master, was often just degraded into simple, witless mockery for popular entertainment. The goal wasn't to reform anymore, it was just to ridicule.
So, ultimately, the collapse of all that Victorian certainty didn't lead to some brave new world of freedom. For a lot of people, it just led to a profound and pervasive sense of anxiety. This feeling that something was deeply, deeply wrong with the human soul.
Thinkers like Kierkegaard and Kafka suddenly became hugely influential, and with them came this fascination with spiritual sickness and mental disturbance. And it created this bizarre new assumption that to be abnormal was, in fact, the only normal way to be.
Psychiatry was no longer just a medical field. It became the main lens for understanding everything. And modern literature, in particular, became obsessed with exploiting abnormality, focusing on broken characters and disintegrated personalities.
Which brings us to our final and I think really provocative question. The 20th century traded what it saw as Victorian hypocrisy for this new ideal of public authenticity. But in an age that developed a real passion for exhibitionism, for living our entire lives out in the open, what was really gained and what might have been lost?